The 22nd chapter. The boy asks himself who he will be. The man asks himself who he is. The elder asks himself who he was. The one who is God asks nothing. Naaman. It had been some time since Fawn had decided to join the fight against the Yolopile. She had thrown herself into the difficult pipeline it took to become an active soldier, a mechanically enhanced fighter on par with those that were eaters, the pride of the Nazareth. They had grown in number as well as overall strength, able to beat back deathless forces, even though they were outnumbered. On their side was technology. Deicide had refused to use the negation weapons, even as he watched his army slaughtered in blood-soaked fields. After a battle, Fawn had always made it a point to linger, hoping she could catch a glimpse of Deicide from inside one of the hangars. "Come back to bed," Second said. Fawn rolled her eyes and grabbed a bottle of water from the kitchen. As she walked back to her bedroom, she passed Fletcher's room. The woman was already up, religiously maintaining her weapon. Lettre was across the hall, contorted into some indescribable shape amongst the covers. She hopped over Second and shimmied back into bed. "So what are we going to do today?" Fawn said. "Eh?" "We can't lie around all day," Fawn said. "Sure we can. Watch," Second said, as he lay as flush as he could against the bed. "Fucker," Fawn said, pinching him. The two lay tangled together for some time, until Second noticed some of Fawn's newest bruises. He kissed each one. They were unusually dark. "They've been rough on you," Second said. "Echo doesn't believe in wearing the floating armor during training," Fawn said. "Yeah, she's like that. She wants you to always be tougher than the competition," Second said. "I don't think eaters actually feel pain, though," Fawn said. Second dragged his fingertips across her back where the umbilical plug had been. The mounts, now fused with her body, would stay, as well as the small well where vestige was stored. Removing the rest of the apparatus would cripple her. Many of those that were forced to come off their daily supply of vestige reported being fatigued and sick for months after the withdrawal. But Fawn felt fine, causing her physicians to give her strange looks. Still, the well sitting against her left kidney remained empty. Fawn fell back onto her pillow and saw the blinking scramble light. Any moment the entire complex would begin to blare with sounds of battle preparations. She turned down the volume of her antlers and snatched a pair of earmuffs from her nightstand, harshly throwing them over Second's head. As soon as the siren went off, Lettre screeched and began to fumble about the room. Fletcher was already suited and began to wrestle Lettre into her own battle garments. Fawn quickly dressed in her suit, so much reminding her of an eater's skid. Second had already dashed from the room, and Fawn shook her head. She had reminded him the duty personnel were to practically live in their equipment, but she had seen for herself the type of soldiers Deicide's army had created. Death meant nothing to them, even when it was certain to be permanent. Out on the plaza, small cars were waiting to take the fighters to the launching station. The drivers looked worse off than the fighters did, frantically waiting for passengers. As each one filled, it shot off toward the station. Fawn and her support team, Lettre and Fletcher, fell into the back of a car and slapped the driver on the shoulder. They barreled forward, through waves and cheers of the civilian populace. For the first time, Fawn realized she was fighting for something that actually mattered. Not a rare mineral mine, or some noble's pride, but against a real oppression that had been called sanctuary by those that created it. Fawn grinned as she saw Second race past the little car on foot. It had been explained to her that when certain individuals had spent a considerable time as an eater, their body continued to produce the chemicals which enabled their freakish strength, as long as they were given a primer. The scientists on board the Nazareth had created their answer to the inert vestige, but it was only useful to those who had been exposed to pure vestige, and those that had resided in Deicide's closest ranks. The car stopped abruptly, and the women dispersed. Lettre went to grab their unit's allotment of negation shells, as Fawn and Fletcher prepared their gear. They both slipped on another suit over the one they were wearing. It was covered in contact pads, plates that would keep hold of the floating armor when not in use. Fletcher began to slap on the cross-shaped armor plates for Fawn. Fawn was using the domino loadout for an aggressor. while Fletchett and Letchway would use the larger, single-layer plates of the support team. When Letchway returned, they began to load their weapons, just as someone brought Fawn's toy box to her, fresh from being modified to fire negation rounds. She kissed it just when a civilian happened to be taking a picture of the crew. Deicide emerged from the darkness on the catwalk, followed by her sisters, Genocide and Viviside. Obviously something's up, but Deicide's down there, and I refuse to pass this opportunity, Deicide said. He seems to be working them up into a frenzy. Don't expect this one to be easy, Genocide said. Moments later they were jumping through the hangar doors, through their own folds in space, and into a grim and rainy forest. The planet had breathable air, but their faceplates were down as they began to creep through the trees. They smelled a strange scent. Deicide and her siblings led the attack, bouncing off the sides of trees so they could see farther ahead. The wet darkness they were trudging through was extremely uninviting. The cloudy sky practically scowled at them from above. Deicide seemed to have a penchant for the grim and macabre. Someone now in the Yolopod was possibly taking photos that would inspire a painting that would hang on his infamous Hall of Heroes. Fawn cycled her weapon out of habit. She liked to feel the ammo revolving inside. They heard an air siren and immediately stopped to listen. Fawn's eyes darted back and forth across the gray horizon, finding nothing. Once Deicide gave the order to move once again, they pressed on, and as they came to the clearing, they saw Deicide sitting at the edge of a lake. He was alone, antennas glowing red in the dark backdrop, artificially created by the abyss. Fawn's chest tightened, knowing it was a trap, but was unable to perceive where its edges lie. Deicide returned to the ground with a heavy wet stomp, halting the force. Deicide looked up, his diamond eyes twinkling in the gloomy partial light. Deicide nodded toward Fletchett, who began to set up for a shot. As she laid into prone position, Deicide began to wave lazily. "Hold it," Deicide said. "Oh, fuck no. Who the fuck does he think we are? We grew up with this punk. I helped him run this game," Genocide said. "Yeah, I bet Hellmouth and White are itching to pop out," Viviside said, looking up at the trees. "But where are the eaters?" Deicide said. "More than likely in the lake," Genocide said. "That isn't a lake. Some kind of peninsula." "Look," Second said, pointing to the left and right of them. "Hey!" someone shouted. Before Deicide could give the word to retreat, their entire flank was met with the wall of the void. From the folds of the physical darkness that had emerged, an array of eyes and tortured feminine moans. It shot up and over their heads until they were encased in a lightless dome. Fawn immediately began firing, her face lit up by the muzzle of her weapon. The negation rounds tore open temporary holes in the structure of the abyss, but were quickly filled, and she was amused by their persistence. The abyss was as large as she had ever been. The negation rounds could not begin the chain reaction which would be needed to weaken her, so that it would leave her pup vulnerable. The abyss's screams blared through their communication equipment, leaving them practically deaf on top of being blind. Unseen black tendrils sliced through the air around Fawn's person. She heard them crash through the armor of her allies. They hollered as the oily javelins gushed poison into their bodies. The countless voices of the abyss laughed at the anguish she had caused. The kind of madness one only remembers from a nightmare. The type of chaos very few could survive unscathed. The sound of metal warping was heard as the infinite mouths devoured the guts of those that had been speared, eating them from the insides. As Fawn witnessed the atrocity surrounding her, not once did the abyss attack her. In fact, her inky fibers seemed to go out of their way to avoid contact with the woman. She remembered that an unusual privilege had been forced upon her by Deicide's wife, and now the abyss was her hellish sister-in-law, or perhaps a mother-in-law. In the light of a few red flares their group had managed to light off, Fawn saw the lionesses had finally engaged Deicide. She watched as Deicide fought the woman with a lazy grin on his face, looking completely relaxed as he blocked and redirected their attacks. His movements appeared overly rehearsed, like a simple math equation chiseled into some impossibly hard stone. The outcome would always be the same. As she crossed into the darkness surrounding her, the abyss barred her passage. She fired a short stitch of shells to free her path, but this alerted Deicide to her presence. As if Fawn had called his name, Deicide turned toward her, then grabbed Viviside by the face without looking, and rammed her head into a black spike that the abyss had provided. The abyss pumped herself inside the woman's body until vestige bled from every orifice. Inside her body, every cell was being reprogrammed so that it would fall into lockstep with the abyss's.